I would like to now, with deep admiration, welcome this outstanding group of leaders for our next panel, Feminist Frameworks for Global Climate Justice, and thank all of our speakers for your leadership in this urgent fight for justice. To truly meet the climate crisis at its roots and at the scale and depth it demands, we need bold systemic policies that cut across every sector of society, grounded in feminist principles and unwavering in commitment to dismantling historic systems of oppression. This crisis didn't emerge out of nowhere. It's the direct result of deeply entrenched interlocking systems, as we've been talking about, of capitalism, resource extraction, imperialism, labor exploitation, colonialism, and patriarchy. And tackling the climate emergency means bringing coherence across all policy sectors and centering those most impacted. So when we interrogate these root causes, we see that women in all their diversity are bearing the brunt of this crisis. Why? Because their basic rights continue to be denied, ignored, or rolled back across the globe. And just ahead of this year's International Women's Day, this year, the UN released a report showing that 1 in 4 countries is experiencing a backlash against women's rights, with the Secretary General warning that women's rights are under siege by patriarchal institutions and governments. So let's also be clear that Indigenous women, Black and Brown women, and women from the Global South carry the heaviest weight of all. Yet time and time again, it's their very communities who are showing us a way forward. And despite immense odds, despite systemic violence and disregard, women, feminists, and gender diverse people are rising up. We are already crafting, practicing, and leading with solutions that are so desperately needed, as we've been hearing about already since this assembly began. And with that, it's my honor to introduce these remarkable group of feminist climate justice leaders. First, we'll be hearing from Noelene Nabulivou, who is Dravuwalu, Naceva, and Kadavu. Noelene is the Executive Director of DIVA for Equality and Movement-Led Committee, Pacific Islands Feminist Alliance for Climate Justice from Fiji. Then we'll be hearing from Dipti Bhatnagar, from the Commission Project in Mozambique. And then Adenike, who is Adenike Titilope Oladosu. She is the Executive Director of I Lead Climate Action Initiative from Nigeria. Then we'll be hearing from Bridget Burns, the Director of Women's Environment and Development Organization in the US. Then from Sydney Wiesner, Executive Director, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance from the US. And then wrapping it up, Sascha Gabizon, who is the Executive Director of Women Engage for a Common Future from the Netherlands. And what an incredible powerhouse we have here. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Noelene. Thank you so much for being with us. Do we have Noelene here? Okay. Noelene is not online yet, and we'll work to get her online. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Dipti. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this invite. So lovely to be with all of you today. My name is Dipti Bhatnagar. I work with the Commission Project, and I'm a volunteer for Justice Ambiental in Mozambique. I'll talk a little bit about the work of both of these organizations. So the Commission Project is basically looking at what are the barriers to fossil fuel phase out. We know that we need to phase out fossil fuels. It's destroying communities on the ground. It's causing conflict, militarization, and insecurity in so many places. It's deepening the indebtedness of so many of our countries. And at the same time, it's causing climate change in ways that are also harming our own countries. Mozambique is one of the countries most affected by the ravages of the climate crisis. So what we've been doing is having conversations with people across the world from different sectors to look at what are the barriers to fossil fuel phase out. Let's actually have this conversation in all of its depth. Let's target the international financial architecture as a barrier to the fossil fuel phase out, meaning that when Ecuador votes, when the people of Ecuador vote to say stop drilling in the ITT block of Yasuni Park, and Moody's credit rating agency downgrades Ecuador's credit rating, that is a barrier to the phase out. When Mozambique has the highest ISDS burden in the world, that means the investor state dispute settlement, which is a mechanism by which companies take our countries to court. Mozambique's ISDS burden is up to $30 billion. If Total, the multinational fossil fuel company from France, decides to take Mozambique to court, the bill will be about $30 billion. This is an absolute travesty. This is a barrier to the phase out. So we've been looking at what are the different barriers and what are the bridges that we need to build to be able to get over those barriers. Friends, sisters, brothers, I've just come from Bonn, from the intersessional. I'm sure some of you have been there or your colleagues have been there. It is becoming increasingly depressing of a space. It's amazing to be with our sisters, to be with our colleagues and comrades there, but it's getting increasingly depressing because we are wondering how that space is going to actually deliver for what it needs to. With the current global geopolitics, we're seeing multilateralism in great crisis. And multilateralism is the best that we have at the moment as global South peoples, as global South countries, because at least our countries can raise that flag and say, hey, I want to speak. Togo, I want to speak. Vietnam, I want to speak. Ecuador, I want to speak. And there is a voice. That multilateral space is getting harder and harder for us to be able to hold accountable. And of course, we use all terrains of struggle. We continue to struggle there. We continue to struggle at every single terrain that we can use to be able to push back on all of these systems. So one of the things that we're doing at the Commission Project is trying to understand what is it? What are these conversations that we need to be having? In this time, with this current global geopolitics, it feels like we need to be able to strengthen our own unities. We need to be able to see each other, to be able to have those deep conversations, and to be able to hold each other and say, this is getting increasingly depressing. What do we do? What feels like the way out? So that's what we're trying to do. We've held about 1,700 conversations with people across the world in the last 2 years, talking about what are the barriers to fossil fuel phase out and how can we move ahead. And this is what I love doing this. This is my work. I want to continue doing this. What does that mean? What does that look like? It means bringing along doctors and health professionals. Oh my goodness, somebody's saying there's no sound. Is everything okay? Everything's fine? Okay.
Yes, everything is fine. There might be some issues with a few people. We will work to fix it. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So what does it mean? These conversations mean bringing doctors and health professionals together who are increasingly speaking out about the health harms of fossil fuels, what fossil fuels are doing to our people's bodies, to the air, to the soil, to the water, the things that actually keep us alive. I will speak slower for the translators. Thank you for that reminder. It means bringing in trade unions. It means bringing in our worker friends along with us whose livelihoods depend on fossil fuels in so many cases. How do we together build those pathways that those communities whose bodies and communities are also being destroyed by fossil fuels, how does that look like, bringing them together? We need feminists in the room. We need feminist economists in the room, very, very specifically, who bring in the element of valuing care work in our systems, in our economies. We need lawyers, we need affected peoples, of course, we need the indigenous peoples. Also those who are fighting disinformation, those who are fighting how AI and big tech, the big tech broligarchs, I have a connection with the San Francisco Bay Area. Every time I visit, I am more and more horrified by how much power and money the big tech broligarchs, and they are mostly men, are wielding in today's date. And I'll come back on one specific point about the big tech broligarchs. But all of these conversations about fossil fuel phase out is what we need to be having. One point about we are always fighting for rights-based struggles. Right to energy, right to food, right to clean water, right to sanitation, right to communication, right to transport, rights for our peoples to have rights over the things, the basic things that we need to keep ourselves alive. At the same time, you have billionaires like Peter Thiel from South Africa. We, of course, know some other white South Africans who are creating havoc in the world currently. Peter Thiel and company go to Honduras, go to an island in Honduras and try and create a private city over there. And what do? When the local people start to protest, what do? They switch off their energy and water. We are fighting for rights for people because we know that they are going to weaponize those very rights, those very basic things, food, water, shelter, that our people need to stay alive. They're going to weaponize it. That's why we need to fight. Really quickly, Justiça Ambiental is my home organization in Mozambique. We are hosting the 9th Maputo workshop on corporate impunity and human rights. This is happening the week of the 28th of July. I would welcome all of you to come through. We'll be talking about Pan-Africanism, but also connecting it to the whole world. The work that we're doing in Mozambique, fighting against gas, the Cabo Delgado project, where so much horrific stuff has happened, fighting against coal and dams, but also building. My partner at the moment is in Mabu Forest, which is the last remaining mid-altitude rainforest in central Mozambique. They're working with the community, local bioconstruction methods to construct a school for the community there. There is so much beautiful stuff happening in our communities. There's the resistance work, there's the transformation work. All of it is happening, and it's just wonderful to be here and to be able to share all of this with you and to be able to hear about all of your work. And yes, I welcome you to come to Mozambique, 28th of July. I'll drop a link in the chat, what that's about. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much, Dipti. Thank you for your leadership, amazing work that you're doing, and thank you for your powerful comments. And, it is so important that we keep fighting the bad, if you will, and building the good. And you really demonstrated that so well in your comments and really helping us to focus what is so important at this time. Thank you so much for your work and inviting us to Mozambique. We'll all go there. And now I would like to bring Noelene Nabulivou. I believe we have her back on with us. Yes. Okay. Noelene, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Osprey and everyone. I have some slides, but before I move to those, just to say, what you love, you fight for. And this is my island of Kadavu. And that's why I do the work I do. I do the work for the planet, but really it is about what's happening to my home. I'd like to move to the second slide if I can, and then we'll just go straight through and I'll speak to the slides. Thank you. Are those ready? Thank you. Just the second slide. Yeah. And we'll move fairly quickly, so I'll just keep making this movement as we go. I really wanted to just start by saying we're Pacific feminists defending the living planet, and it really started with a small group of us who were really, really clear that we had to work on issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis in our own place. So if you look at, in the Pacific, we have double the global rates of violence against women and girls. We have many of the challenges that are about Pacific women and gender non-binary people and all our communities that are trying to negotiate in our diverse bodies, in our intersectional bodies, with fluidity and change, and trying to do it in a quarter of the world's surface, in an oceanic continent that's the largest in the world with 22 island states and territories. And that's sometimes very difficult for us to feel, one, located with each other, to feel the solidarity when we have, 60 years of genocidal experiences of the women in West Papua. We still have some of the remaining colonies in the world. We have so many issues of militarism, in Hawaii, for instance, and just a whole range of issues that women are dealing with every day. So I wanted to show that that's happening, but also our connections throughout the local, the national, the regional, and the global as feminists is so incredibly important. And that's why you can see that, you know, at CSW 68, for instance, we were there, as we are in so many of the multilateral processes, but also beyond the reach of the state, to be saying that, you know, these social movements with WECAN and WEDO and so many of the social movements that have been here throughout the world in the past decades and really centuries, that women have been finding ways to work with each other. Next slide, thank you. And I mean, this urgency that we find ourselves in, you know, it doesn't matter. Thank you, Dipti, and to hear, you know, the amount of work that's going on around the world is always just a wonderful thing for feminists to be able to assure each other that this work is ongoing and fierce and strong. And for us, it's about this issue of, you know, the changes that we can see from the local to the global and back, and the fact that already we know that we've crossed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and that we're thinking that the next will be ocean acidification, which takes us into a whole new set of worries in terms of the ocean and cryosphere, which we already know is a problem. We know that by 2050, we're likely to see more plastic than fish in our oceans. And for Pacific people, as with people all around the world, this is a really worrying time, a time of ecocide. And often we still see these platforms and sets of initiatives that look like they're not acknowledging the fact that we've put so much pressure on our living planet, and that we need to move and to break and to build in very, very different ways, and with an urgency that, you know, is exponential from where we've been in the past decades. I'll just move to the next slide. One of the wonderful things that we've been trying to do is also to change our own headspace, you know, before we are going out into the world and sharing our sets of work that we're doing, is that we've got to be really conscious of the fact that every individual matters, not just in terms of the struggle, but being able to affirm that our gender and our intersectionality, the multiple identities and the powers that we have are really important in our work, and that both the everyday, the material realities of every day matter, as do the systems, and that we can't survive without an intact ecosphere. You know, 3 minutes without breath and we're done. 3 days without water and we're done. 3 weeks without food and we're done. We're biological creatures, as are all of these wonderful species around the world. 200 species a day are becoming extinct, and we're doing that. We are the cause of that. So we are hurting ourselves, but also so many other species around the planet. And one of the things that we're spending a lot of time with each other on talking about and thinking through and integrating into our praxis is this return to the cycle of life, and being able to do it in a feminist way, because we know these energy flows, and we know the way that you know, the planetary boundaries occur, but often we live our lives as if that wasn't the case. And one of the things that we're trying to do in the Pacific feminist community of practice is to say it's really important that we change our own head and heart and our praxis, because we now have the ability to irrevocably affect our species and others. So can we defend the commons? Are we doing that in all our work as feminists? Next slide. And how we're doing that is we're talking about the actual structure and processes and content that we're using for our feminist activism. And there are pockets of this work that are connecting up all around the 22 island states and territories. That's looking at both our personal sets of, you know, the anti-coloniality and the anti-heteronormative practices that we've taken on from so many other places, and to hand them back and to say, we are reclaiming who it is to be Pacific feminists. We are reclaiming the notions of multiple forms of family. There are so many ways that we are trying to reconstruct the way that we are in the world, of the world, and move in the world. And so we're using a praxis that is circular and spiral. And the reason why we talk about this is because it is revolutionary. If you have people who say you only are important in the work of climate or of gender justice because you have, you know, some letters after your name, we are rejecting that outright, and we are being very, very clear on how we put forward our expertise and doing it in a very deliberate way. So when we say that we are the experts, we are absolutely clear on why we are doing that. That there is a lot of fluidity and flexibility in the work that we ourselves do within the Pacific, and that we are overall moving from this idea that is very neoliberal and capitalist. And as you heard from Dipti, you know, that this idea that because you have this paper money, that you are, you know, that you rule, you have a might is right, and you can rule the world. So moving from an ego to an eco space. And this idea of sovereignty is very, very important in that. And the work of First Nations within Australia and within the Pacific states is very important, because we have a lot of countries like Australia, New Zealand, and the EU and the US and others who are, you know, speaking to us as if they are gender champions, but at the same time doing these horrific things around the world. We know that historically, but we are speaking out loudly about it in ways that we never have before. Next slide. And one of that is about this negotiation between holding what it is that is beautiful and ecologically balanced and sound, and talking about the fact that we are always in an ever-changing fluidity. Because in our region, often the work will stop, not because of outsiders, but because we ourselves from the Pacific are telling ourselves that we have to hold on tightly to who we are as Indigenous peoples of the Pacific, but without talking about the fact that there is always room for change. Next slide. And that we can use our power, and that we can negotiate. And feminists, we know, have always been very good at this work around hierarchical power and democratic power, and how we work on issues of personal and collective. And we in small island states, I think we are very good at that, and we should take that knowledge and experience and expertise out into the world. Just as we gain from others, we insist now that we are being listened to as well. Next slide. I'm going to move faster now, and just to say this work on feminist embodied praxis and on intersectionality and interlinkage is very important, and the knowledge that we have within the feminist movement. If you look at some of our interlinkage analysis from Dawn, for instance, from Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era, there are ways that we can embed that knowledge and praxis. And I really want to encourage people not to go to just the mainstream, you know, development, maldevelopment ideas and praxis, but to look within our movements for what is strong and true and can help us in these urgent ecocidal times. Next slide. The vanua protects us, that which is us, and where we are clear that there's never been a separation between humans and vanua and whenua is very important. The Whangarai River on the west coast of North Island, New Zealand, is now protected as a living being. And we have Wales, where our chiefs from 3 countries have already come together and said they are now protected as living beings with rights. And we work on the concept of nature, and our states are starting to do that now, but so much are feminists at the center of this praxis. How can I be less than you when I am a mighty ocean, when I am the Wansalwara, when I am the Wasawasa, and that which joins us around the world in the ocean? So we refuse that idea that we can accept any forms of gender-based violence and any forms that kill ourselves, other species, and the living planet. Next slide. Very quickly, just to I won't talk about this one, but just to say that there are calls for defense that come from who we are, from where we are. And we insist that others are doing that work with us from these deliberate calls that we're making from social movements, including feminist movements. Keep moving, please. And then just keep scrolling through these slides. There are sets of work that are around water and sanitation, that are about the water tanks that are required, that are about making sure that we're pushing back against the Fukushima nuclear wastewater in the Pacific Ocean, and seeing that as both gender justice work, but also as ecological justice work. This is my village where they are building a new bridge. There is all kinds of work that is happening every day, as Dipti has already talked about. Keep going. And that we are building many of these things on the back of neo-colonial structures, and that as we build, we have to break. There are sets of work that we're doing in different multilateral structures, and we refuse to put those down, even though there is such pressure now. Please come to the Women Deliver conference that is next year here in Melbourne, in Naarm. I am the chair of the regional committee on that. We have 17 demands, and we will be releasing that. This is just a look at them so that you see that part of what we are doing is trying to be much more clear and coherent about the things that we require, not just of ourselves, but of you all and of the feminist movement. So thank you for the opportunity to do this. I hope I haven't gone over time. Thanks so very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noelene, for that powerful presentation. As always, so much information in all of those slides. I'm sure we could have spent the day with you. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the knowledge that you're carrying. And also, I have to say, I love your fierce insistence of coming into your space. And we need to be doing that. And I love that you're taking up space. Thank you. Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to be hearing from Adenike. You have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you so very much. So I'm excited to join this event and to share the realities, my work on climate advocacy, and also as an eco-feminist. And so I'm the founder of I Lead Climate Action Initiative from Nigeria. And one of our works include the fact that spotlighting women and also supporting women with resources that we need to bridge effort towards achieving equality. And one of those several realities of how climate change is impacting women in Nigeria is the fact that once there is drought, women tend to walk farther. That means a longer distance to get water. And so it could take several kilometers. And so over time, as a climate researcher as well, I find out that women spend 40 billion hours in a year to search for water in sub-Saharan Africa. So that 40 billion hours in a year, when it was estimated, we find out that it's the amount of hour that the working force in the US spend on productive activities that women in Africa waste on trying to get water and the source for firewood and other things. And so there's the time poverty of trying to look for those resources. So imagine that 40 billion hours is put into use towards environmental protection, or even as a care work, their time is also being compensated. It would have helped to enhance progresses in achieving climate justice, and also help to achieve several goals that women have in the society. So that is one issue that we are faced with, and the impact of how climate change is to women. And as well, why I call myself an eco-feminist is also from the fact that young girls, once there is drought and flood, young girls are given out in marriage as a survival strategy to deal with the harsh condition of the climate crisis. Because one thing is that when the flood comes, it sweeps away the farmer's land. and then it takes away their livelihoods. And then the young girls are being given out because in return they get money for the family to take care of the family. And so those young girls fall victims of their rights being deprived to go to school or even have access to become change makers in their society. So these are things I see every day, and I've also been the reality of me trying to walk several distance to get water and at the same time affect education and even other rights in the society. And so when I look at this reality, I see a reflection in it, and I see there is a need for us to act on these realities. And also the third point for me is the fact that women in my society or my community doesn't have the right to own a land. So because we are in a patriarchal kind of society, they say land to be owned by male. And so without having access to own a land, women are deprived of resources. For example, resources that they need to grow their agricultural farms or even own a land of their own. And so because women that doesn't have that land, it affects agricultural productivity. And that was why when I started with the fact that at Elite Climate, what we are trying to do is to bridge those resource gap in order to achieve gender equality through an eco-feminist pathway. And so over time, when we have done this, we're giving women access to resources such as land, organic fertilizer, indigenous seedlings, we have seen that it has helped to multiply productivity. And over 100,000 women has benefited from different communities. And we've seen increase in productivity of such kind of women in the society. So this is the kind of eco-feminist pathway that we're trying to create, where women have those platforms, those safe space for healing, to become the true custodian of the environment and to also become change makers in their society. Because I know women have those change making agent ability, and we also have the indigenous knowledge, but sometimes or most times or all the times we lack those platforms that we need to carry out those activities. So those are the platforms that I'm trying to create to see that women have that gap or those distance that those resources that we have to bridge the gap. And another fourth reason is the fact that the non-climatic factors. So most times we talk about the climatic factors of flood, drought affecting women. Sometimes the non-climatic factors, such as the kind of tradition that affects women towards participating. Because some tradition, they believe that women should stay behind, behind the scene and not to do some other things. But then over time, when we've engaged with policymakers, when we've engaged with traditional rulers, we've tried to educate them. Because I believe that if you don't know that a problem exists, you can't solve it. And so those are my points of coming to the fact that bringing this problem or trying to address this problem is something that we could do to solve those issues. And so that is why I'm working with different women from different communities. And if you could also check our recent coverage by ZDF, it's a German media that came to Nigeria. They showcase our work in the field and how we are engaging with these women and how they are also telling their stories. And so these are things that we are trying to find solutions. And so one of our latest or newest form of initiative is how we want to integrate women towards using the GIS. So the GIS is a remote sensing kind of technology that will help women to cut down the number of hours being used to get water or firewood. And so beating that time, that number of hours would also help to solve the time poverty. And as well, having access to energy, such as renewables, is also one thing that we're also trying to do in order to beat the energy poverty. And so we always see women bearing those brunt of this crisis. And we are also trying to see how we could address those in Nigeria and even across the world. And so that is why solidarity like this, or this kind of platform, is a way we could connect with other women, the different initiatives that we are doing, and how we could learn with each other. So I saw that my time is up. And so as well, I also in 2018, I created a platform called the womenandcrisis.com, where I've written different articles on those intersection or intersectionality of women and the climate crisis, and why I am an eco-feminist, and why I'm also leading this movement strongly in Africa, to see that more women becomes change makers, and to also showcase how the climate crisis is affecting women, because sometimes people doesn't see those clear problems in the society until when it is figured out. So those are issues that we are trying to work on, and also bringing different initiative on board as well. So I see that my time is up. So if you have questions, I'm happy to receive it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adenike. That was really an amazing presentation. And thank you for the incredible work that you're doing, and also the connections that you're making. And there's so much we could talk about, but I just really admire the work that you're doing, and also, really understanding this huge issue of women not having land rights and how deep that is. There's many things you said, but I just wanted to also spotlight, again, this the fact of the intersectionality of these patriarchal institutions and women not having rights, and how deep that is and affects everything. So thank you for pointing that out, amongst many other things. And with that, I'd love to hand the floor now to Bridget Burns.
Thank you so much, Osprey. Thank you to everyone who's gone before. It's a beautiful panel to be on and space to be in, with so many people that I have learned from and that I admire. And really building off of Adenike and this work of the powerful work of creating platforms where we can build power together, build power in solidarity, and be in collective, is both the story of my organization, WEDO, the Women's Environment and Development Organization, and one of the things I think is fundamental to feminist climate justice and advocacy at this intersection. And it's wonderful to come after, it's always intimidating, but wonderful to come after Dipti and Noelene, who are both pointing out, doing in the deeply feminist way, both what it is to tell the truth about the crises that we're facing. And it reminds me of this quote, that the earth is dying. It isn't dying, it's being killed, and those who are killing it have names and addresses. And I feel like feminists do a good job at speaking that truth, but then also to Noelene in reminding us about the spirit in which we think about the world and the alternatives to the current societies and systems that we have, is not just our vision for an alternative world, but it's also a vision for the way in which we organize with each other and the way in which we show up in spaces. And I think this beautiful narrative weaving of telling the truth, of understanding how we are connected, and seeing examples like Adenike of how we are building platforms and spaces for people to come together. And WEDO has been working for over 35 years in trying to build collectives using the space of multilateralism. And for the last decade or so, with so many of you have been engaging, for example, in the COP space, in the climate space. I also just came back from Bonn in a space that is not feminist whatsoever. It's incredibly challenging. And not only are we facing a growing backlash against gender equality as a whole, in movements as a whole, in multilateralism, but there's also an insidious and troubling challenge of the decision makers who see gender as a box to check and not a framework for justice. And I think when we come together and when we talk about what is a global feminist analysis and a framework for climate change, I started to think about three fundamental shifts that make this not just about how do we ensure women are included in climate action, which is critical and important, but not enough of an analysis of what we're calling for in a feminist analysis of system change. But what are some of the fundamental shifts that we're calling for? This is looking at a shift from vulnerability to power. We are recognizing women in all their diversity, especially Indigenous women. Women in the global majority are not passive victims of climate change. And we say it all the time. We write about it, we talk about it, and yet in global policy spaces, it's still often the entry point for people making these connections between climate change and women's rights, starting from this assessment of women as vulnerable and still passive victims. And feminist frameworks for climate justice don't just highlight the leadership of women, they resource it, they protect it, and they center it. And I think that's how we lead our advocacy as we do, but also framed in the collective advocacy of the women and gender constituency, for example, in the UNFCCC. It's very much about moving from technocratic fixes to systemic transformation. We know that climate is not a standalone crisis. We just had a press conference as the women and gender constituency on why Palestine is a feminist issue. It's a climate justice issue. It understands the interconnectedness of economies, of health, migration, food systems, militarism, and we know that's why our solutions must be intersectional and targeted. And then I think the third area is that we understand we're moving from extractive to regenerative futures. We have to rethink our relationship to land, to labor, and to life itself, and to resist a push for green growth that can sometimes be packaged in women's leadership often in climate action. And so we try to be very distinctly feminist in the way that we are pushing for climate justice and bring that analysis into spaces like the UNFCCC. And it means that when we're engaging in things like the Gender Action Plan, we are pushing for intersectionality. We're pushing for more than just token performativity. We're trying to create policies that are not siloed. We're making sure folks understand that our advocacy is not just adding women and stirring, that it is about accessible climate finance and also shifting the flows of finance in general to divest from harm to be able to invest in care. And it's standing side by side with our siblings and Indigenous peoples to reject false solutions around carbon offsets and to uphold and those factors that are upholding corporate impunity. Maybe in terms of where I would conclude this, because I know we're running short on time, I think that in this moment, those of us who are pushing for this systemic analysis need to push for and have ourselves political courage to continue to challenge militarized, market-driven solutions, to continue to push for resources that match the scale of the work needed, not just small, one-off pilot women-led projects around environment, but long-term flexible projects that build power at the roots. And that means truly systemic work on how we move money and how we divest money from where it is causing harm. And then finally, I think it requires the deepest level of solidarity. I think at the heart of climate justice lies global feminist solidarity, not as a slogan, but a living, breathing practice. I think it's the connective tissue between movements resisting extractivism in the Amazon, rebuilding in the Pacific, as we saw from Noelene, or organizing in, communities in the Bronx or in Nairobi. It's an ecosystem rooted in care, nourished by our interdependence, and resilient by design in the face of patriarchy, white supremacy, colonial capitalism, and the genocidal erasure of people and lands. We have to be telling the truth, holding each other together, going into spaces of power and rebuilding and reshaping that power. And I think with that framework in spaces like this, it gives us the opportunity and the hope to challenge this very, very challenging time we're in and this very oppressive system in which we are working.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Really appreciate your comments and framing, and also for being at Bonn. Really, really excellent remarks. And Yeah, I think I just wanted to note too how important it is that we have spaces that we do as creating and the women and gender constituency and all of the speakers that are here today throughout these panels, that we do create our own space because we do need to collect our own power. We have solutions, we have an analysis as feminists that is needed around the world that has been missing due to gender inequality and due to patriarchy. And so, yeah, I really love the framing that you offered, that it needs to be really a framework that is across all sectors. You know, we need to quit being siloed. And I want maybe at the end, Bridget, I'd love to come back to you because we do know on one little data point that's important around knowing that the COP30 presidency shared the COP30 action agenda on June 20th during Bonn, and there was no mention of gender commitments out of the 30 points that they made, which we find really outrageous, especially since this is a big year for the Gender Action Plan. So maybe we'll catch you at the end of this just to get an update on that. And with that, I would love to now invite Cindy Wiesner to join us. Thank you so much for joining us, Sydney. Cindy, I think you need to put your mute.
I'm good. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
yeah. Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Hey, everybody. First of all, just want to saludos to WECAN, the sisters and kinfolk on this panel, and all the compañeros attending. My name is Cindy Wiesner. I'm with Grassroots Global Justice Alliance here on Turtle Island in the US. And, I can't start today without actually just mentioning what is happening, particularly Trump's regime illegally attacking Iran this weekend, throwing us into potentially a new imperialist war that we know will lead to more death, more devastation, more destruction for people in the MENA region in the Southwest Asia, but also for people here in the US, and making that connection that we know that the big winners here are the weapons industry, and also that we know that at this moment there's just also a huge level of calling on our elected officials, on global leaders, not just here in the US, but globally, are really condemning, right? That we do not want a war on Iran, that we want to end the US-backed genocide in Palestine. We want a divestment from death and an investment in life. And, as we think about this moment, this political moment, and how we're understanding what's new, what are we facing, what are the threats, what are the opportunities, we need to think about that that the neoliberal consensus is cracking, and we are in an interregnum, right, where the far right is ascending, an ascending force, not just here in the US, but globally. And we're seeing the extremity of heteropatriarchy, new forms of colonialism tied to AI, artificial intelligence. We're seeing the last stage of capitalism, which is fascism, coming into a reality, and with more war, more militarization, more occupation, and an attack and a criminalization on dissent. And continued all through that, white supremacy, et cetera, right? And I think our movements have been building for a long time, right? And the feminist plural political subjects, right? The conscious forces have been building and rebuilding, right? Our popular movements of affected peoples around the world. And many of us all have been talking about for decades and constructing models and experiments on the ground, that some of them that have grown and blossomed and some of them that have failed. But we have this vision of what we call systemic alternatives, right? And an economy that centers life, that centers care, and that centers global well-being. For us at GGJ, we call it the fair economy. What we're fighting for is the fair economy, which is a feminist anti-racist, regenerative economy. And I think that the main task and the main mandate for the movement for all of us, given this global context that we're in terms of this fight against global fascism, is that we need to take the task seriously of making the alternative visible in a very real and powerful and concrete way. I wanted to talk about to build on what Bridget and others have talked about in terms of the road to Belém, right, in Brazil this November. And I think I want to share 3 key moments that we are involved in. Grassroots Global Justice is a member of the MAR, the movement of impacted people by dams, and there's going to be an international encounter right before the COP begins. And this is really trying to cohere and build an international movement of climate affected peoples. And this, we've been involved since 2019, and there's been a lot of work. And in fact, there on the continent in Africa, there will be an important gathering happening this weekend from the 26th through the 28th in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where 12 countries across the continent are going to come together to really do that intentional study alignment, but also international building and being able to articulate what is energy democracy look like? What does a just transition from a feminist point of view look like? And how do we keep building up and that articulation as impacted peoples? There's a second thing that is also important that the Brazilian social movements have been organizing for the past year and a half, and they've invited international social movements, which is doing the People Summit. And the entire summit is being organized around 6 convergence axes. One, to talk about living territories and popular and food sovereignty, around historical reparations, combating environmental racism and corporate power. Third axis is around just power and inclusive transition. The fourth is against oppressions for democracy and people's internationalism. The fifth is around just cities and living urban peripheries. And the sixth is around popular feminism and women's resistance in territories. And all of these 6 axes reflect our grassroots feminist politics and the movement alignment work that we've been doing and building together for so many years. And we will be present in all of the axes, but playing a role around the axis 4, which is really around the fight against the rise of fascism and in defense of our democracy. And given this moment, particularly that we're facing here in the US, but being in conversation and in dialogue around how are we going to fight, right? Not only the fascists in power, but also the techno-fascists, the bros, right? And how they're controlling our communities. That we know the interconnection about the development of AI needs water, needs resources. We will be seeing new forms of neocolonialism in the advances of technology. And then the third place that we have to pay attention to, and you heard our sisters that were in Bonn, right, is that there is the inside strategy of the COP30 that is a very contested terrain. And we've been saying for the last decade or more about how that terrain has been co-opted by the very polluters, right? By the very fossil fuel industry, by very folks that have actually are the people that we fight against. And it is full of contradictions, and every year, including this year, has those contradictions. But it's important as a contested space of struggle where we align our movements not only on the outside but also on the inside of the COP, where the civil society constituencies are clearer and more visible than ever, where we do side events, press conferences, actions, and where we try to speak with one voice about really lifting up the declaration that comes out of the People's Summit and really put forward the true demands of the popular movements. one of the most important things to come out of from our perspective is that our movements come out stronger. One in the lead up through Belém, during Belém, but then afterwards, so that we can again be clear, more clear about our mandate and what we're aligning around for the world that we're fighting for. So I'm going to close out that with our slogan is that we make the interconnections, right, around saying no war, no warming, but building a feminist, anti-racist, regenerative economy. And I want to thank WECAN and everyone who's on here, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Really appreciate your analysis and the comments you've made, and also to share with people all of the work that goes in by our movements before the COP has and that COP happens, so that outside these spaces of the COP, we're building power in our own analysis so that we do have interventions that are not business as usual, that really go up against these oppressive systems, and how critical it is that we keep ourselves collected, organizing, and moving together. And then also, as one piece of it, not the only piece of it, going into the COP with interventions, going to the COP very strong, so that we can, in fact, disrupt that space and bring new ideas and new visions that are so desperately needed in that space. So thank you so much for bringing that forward. And then the last speaker for this particular panel is Sascha Gabizon, and you have the floor, Sascha.
Wonderful to see you all. It's very late here in Bonn at the climate negotiations. I just arrived for the second week, and I'm Sascha Gabizon from Women Engaged for a Common Future. We are an ecofeminist network. We work in 70 countries with ecofeminist partners on gender justice, climate justice, toxic-free future. We're angry. We're very angry at what's happening. We're preparing, of course, for the climate COP30 in Belém. And as you all know, the situation, as we heard from all the previous speakers, the global situation is terrible, with a huge backlash against human rights, against climate justice. But this is a really important week because we are negotiating the Gender Action Plan, which needs to be approved by negotiators latest in Belém at COP30. And I don't know how much you know about this, but of course for feminists, there key issues, like we heard from the previous speaker from Nigeria, that women's land rights are core to climate justice, that sexual and reproductive health and rights are core to climate justice, that fighting militarism, oil, gas, plastic pollution, nuclear corporations are feminist issues. And that's why we're making sure that these feminist issues are being discussed at the negotiations here in Bonn. Some countries are afraid. They're afraid of adding wording around SRHR, gender-based violence, and land rights for women, and women in all their diversity. So bringing an intersectional approach is something some of the countries are very scared about, and which we, of course, as feminists are pushing. We had the opportunity to have some of our feminists from the Global South speak to the delegates. And I just want to quote one of our colleagues from Pakistan, Hira, who told her story, that she's from Pakistan and that they had these terrible floods linked to climate change in 2022, where 33 million people across the country lost their livelihoods and were vulnerabilized. And so Hira has been working with these communities, with the women, and for example, she's documenting these stories of how this impacts women's rights. For example, a girl of 14 who was married to a man, 4 times older than her, because her family had lost everything, and they had a huge debt after the floodings. She was sold for $500. and was immediately pregnant. And there's even a term now for these young girls from after the floods. They're called monsoon brides. And there are apparently about 19 million of these young girls who have been, married off at extremely early age because of the terrible economic situation from the floods and the climate crisis in their country. And that's why, as feminists, we are trying to put issues like sexual and reproductive health and rights core and center in the Gender Action Plan for these negotiations leading up to the COP30 in Belém. So we are speaking to the negotiators. We're advancing feminist narratives and alternatives, working with the other movements, the other constituencies, the human rights movements, the climate movements, the fossil fuel-free activists. And of course, we're also promoting the alternatives and highlighting good practices. I don't know if you heard about that, but luckily things in some places are improving, like in Spain. For the first time ever, they had 100% production by renewable energy this April from wind, solar, and hydro. They even produced more than 100%, more than their own need. And this was the first time in the history of the country. And so energy transition is happening, and it can, be the only, it can be the narrative we as feminists also want to bring, but we are adding, of course, dimension and the notion that energy transition should be gender just. And we know that, we're saying energy transition should not be at the cost of indigenous peoples or African and African descendants, and we should not be applauding the huge expansion of whatever electric cars with lithium batteries if at the same time we see that communities are being destroyed because of extractivism and mining for all these minerals which are necessary for the energy transition. And we need to make sure that energy transition is gender just, is climate just. We have to address and protect the environmental and human rights defenders. That's also language we're trying to get into the negotiation text for the Gender Action Plan. And we have to tell these stories. We had speakers here who are from Latin America, where lithium is being mined, where cobalt, copper, gold are being mined, and where the communities downstream are terribly polluted. For example, from mercury used in the gold mining, and babies are born with birth defects. And so, of course, we have to fight this unjust energy transition and address the pollution from these mining corporations and geoengineering corporations that try to also capture tax funds, public funds, in the form of climate funding to then greenwash their activities and try to show them as climate friendly, but they are not. So we have to play a really important role here as advocates for this gender just transition, and to divest from these large corporations, which are still based on this very extractivist, anti-human rights economic model. And instead we should be, and we are, promoting feminist climate solutions and gender just climate solutions. And in our organization, together with the Women and Gender Constituency, 10 years ago at COP21, we launched the Gender Just Climate Solutions program, where every year, from several hundreds of applications, 3 gender just solutions are awarded, and they're able to, the feminists who are leading these projects are able to come to the climate COP. They are, their projects are presented to the ministers and the high-level presenters. And then they form a network, and they've been working together and sharing good practices for the last 10 years. And we've also been crowdfunding for them. And this has been really, really inspiring. And I see that Osprey would like to tell me that my time is maybe getting close to up. I could continue for a long, long time more. But anyway, check it out. Currently, the call is open. So for Gender Just Climate Solutions 2025, go on the website of the Women and Gender Constituency, check it out, spread it in your networks. These are the type of solutions we need to fund with climate funding, and not the big corporations. And I hope to see many of you joining this network for feminist solutions. And back to you, Osprey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sascha. And I know it's quite late there in Bonn, so I really appreciate you being with us and also, being on the ground and representing for so many of us. And I look forward to seeing you at COP30 in Berlin. I'm very sorry, but we're out of time and we need to go to our next panel because we're sort of rolling through the day here. What I would like to suggest, because I think there's such rich tendrils of information that are here, is we have put all the information about the presenters in the chat. And I really, really encourage folks to reach out to all of these amazing feminist leaders and their organizations, which again are in the chat, because I know there's so much more we could discuss, but this has been an extraordinary panel, and the work that is going on in this feminist climate justice space is critical to how we're going to dismantle structures that are not working and rebuild the world that we know is possible. And so, I wanted just to thank everyone. Maybe we could just have just a moment where everyone could be on screen again for just a moment. Jacqueline, if you could do like a gallery view, because I want to be able just to say a bit adieu to all these amazing women and gender diverse leaders before we head out to the next panel. Thank you all.